David had been hiking for 6 hours straight, and his legs were starting to feel like jelly. The October evening was getting colder, and he knew he needed to head back to his truck soon. He'd come to these mountains to take photos of wildlife, hoping to catch some deer or maybe even a bear on camera. But after walking around all day, he hadn't seen much of anything except trees and rocks. He was a simple guy who loved nature and taking pictures. At 28, he worked at a small photo shop in town, but his real passion was capturing the beauty of the wild. These mountains were his favorite place to escape from the stress of everyday life. Nobody ever came up here, which made it perfect for someone who preferred being alone with his thoughts. As David packed up his camera gear, he heard something weird. At first he thought it was just the wind playing tricks on his ears. But then he heard it again, a sound that definitely wasn't natural. It was like someone crying, but not quite. Human. The sound sent chills down his spine. His common sense told him to ignore it and head home. After all, there were all kinds of wild animals in these woods, and some of them could be dangerous. But David had always been the type of person who couldn't walk away when someone might need help. Even as a kid, he was always rescuing stray cats or helping injured birds. The crying sound came again, and this time it was clearer, definitely. Sounded like someone in trouble. David looked around the dark forest and felt his heart beating faster. He grabbed his flashlight and decided to investigate. Just for a few minutes, he told himself. If he didn't find anything quickly, he'd turn back. Following the sound deeper into the woods, David noticed something strange. The trees seemed to be getting brighter ahead, like there was a campfire somewhere. But the light wasn't the warm orange glow of a fire. It was more like a cold blue, light that seemed to pulse and move. As he got closer, David realized the light was coming from a clearing he'd never seen before. He'd been hiking these trails for years, but somehow he'd never noticed this open space. The crying sound was definitely coming from there, and it was getting more desperate. David crept to the edge of the clearing and peered through the bushes. What he saw made him question his own eyesight. In the center of the clearing stood some kind of metal structure that looked nothing like anything humans had ever built. It was smooth and curved, with strange symbols glowing on its surface. That wasn't the most shocking part. Attached to this alien-looking structure was a girl. And she was clearly not from Earth. Her skin had a faint glow to it, like she was lit from within. Her hair was white as snow, and seemed to float around her head as if she was underwater. Most striking of all were her eyes. They were large and silver, reflecting the blue light like mirrors. The girl was trapped by what looked like chains made of pure energy. The blue light that David had seen was coming from these strange restraints that wrapped around her wrists and ankles. Every few seconds, the chains would pulse with electricity, and the girl would cry out in pain. David rubbed his eyes, thinking he might be hallucinating from exhaustion. But when he looked again, everything was still there. The alien girl, the strange machine, the energy chains, it was all real. His hand started shaking as he tried to process what he was seeing. The girl must have sensed his presence because she suddenly looked in his direction. Their eyes met. Across the clearing, and David felt something incredible happen. It was like she was speaking directly into his mind, without using words. He could feel her fear, her pain, and her desperate hope that someone would help her. Even though she looked completely different from any human, David could see the same emotions in her eyes that he'd seen in trapped animals. She was scared, hurt, and completely helpless. In that moment, he didn't care that she was an alien, or that this situation was impossible. All he cared about was that someone needed his help. The girl tried to move toward him, but the energy chains held her back. David could see that she'd been struggling for a long time. Her strange glowing skin was covered in marks where the chains had burned her. It was clear that she'd been trapped here for days, maybe weeks. David started to step into the clearing, but then he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of truck engines was echoing through the forest, getting closer. Heavy vehicles were driving up the mountain roads, and they were heading straight for this location. The alien girl heard the trucks too, and her expression changed from hope to pure terror. Through their strange mental connection, David could feel her panic. Whoever was coming, They weren't friends. They were the people who had put her in this trap, and they were coming back. David's heart was pounding as he realized the danger they were both in. He had stumbled into something much bigger than he could have imagined. This wasn't just about helping someone in trouble. This was about something that could change everything. He thought he knew about the world. The truck engines were getting louder, and David could see headlights cutting through the darkness between the trees. He had maybe 5 minutes before whoever was driving those vehicles would reach the clearing. 5 minutes to decide whether to run away and pretend he'd never seen any of this, or stay and try to help the trapped girl. Looking at her desperate silver eyes, David knew he couldn't abandon her. Even if it meant putting himself in danger. Even if it meant his quiet, simple life would never be the same again. Some things were more important than playing it safe. He took a deep breath, stepped into the clearing, and walked toward the impossible. David could hear the truck engines getting closer with each passing second. The headlights were now visible through the trees, creating dancing shadows across the clearing. He knew he didn't have much time, but he had no idea how to help the trapped girl. As he got closer to her, David could see the energy chains more clearly. They weren't solid like regular chains. They were made of some kind of crackling blue electricity that wrapped around her wrists and ankles. Every time she moved, the chains would glow brighter, and she would wince in pain. The alien girl was staring at him with those incredible silver eyes, and David felt something amazing happen. Pictures started flashing in his mind, not his own. Memories, but hers. He could see men in dark uniforms dragging her from a crashed ship. He saw her being locked up in a cold, white room where people in lab coats did terrible things to her. Through these mental images, David understood that the girl had been a prisoner for months. The people coming in those trucks weren't just soldiers. They were the ones who had captured her and brought her to this place. They had been using her for experiments, trying to understand her technology and abilities. David looked at the energy. Chains again, feeling completely helpless. How was he supposed to break something made of pure electricity? He didn't have any tools except his camera equipment, and that seemed pretty useless against alien technology.
Ow.
But then something incredible happened. The girl somehow pushed another image into his mind. She showed him his own camera, but in the vision, the camera's flash was different. It was brighter, more powerful, connected to something else. David looked down at his camera bag and suddenly understood what she was trying to tell him. Camera flash used a lot of electrical power, especially when he connected it to his portable battery pack for night photography. The girl was somehow telling him that his Earth technology might interfere with her alien restraints. It was an idea, but it was the only chance they had. David quickly pulled out his camera and the extra battery pack he always carried. His hands were shaking as he connected the cables, trying to remember how to set up the high-powered flash mode. The truck engines were getting louder. They would be here in just a few minutes. The girl watched him work, and David could feel her hope growing stronger. Through their mental connection, she was showing him exactly where to aim the flash. The energy chains had some kind of central control point where all the electrical currents met. David aimed his camera at the glowing junction point and pressed the flash button. The clearing lit up like daylight for a split second, and the energy chains flickered. The girl gasped, and David felt a sharp pain shoot through his head. Whatever connection they had, it made them both feel what the other was experiencing. The chains were still there, but they were weaker now. David could see cracks in the blue energy, like broken glass. He set up for another shot, but this time the pain was worse. It felt like someone was driving nails into his brain, and he could tell the girl was suffering too. The sound of truck doors slamming echoed through the forest. David could hear voices shouting orders and the heavy footsteps of people running through the woods. They were almost out of time. David gritted his teeth and fired the flash again. The pain was so intense that he nearly collapsed, but he could see the chains starting to break apart. The girl was crying now, but not from sadness, from relief. She could feel freedom getting closer. On the third try, David had to lean against a tree to stay upright. The mental connection was overwhelming, and he felt like his head might explode. But when he looked at the girl, he saw something that gave him strength. She was smiling at him. and in that smile was the most beautiful expression of gratitude he'd ever seen. David aimed the camera one more time and put everything he had into that final flash. The battery pack made a loud buzzing sound, the camera got hot in his hands, and the clearing exploded with light. This time, the pain was so bad that David actually screamed, but it worked. The energy chain shattered like glass, dissolving into sparks that faded into nothing. The girl collapsed to the ground, free but exhausted from months of captivity. David stumbled over to her, his vision blurry from the pain but feeling incredible relief. The girl looked up at him with tears in her silver eyes. Even though she couldn't speak his language, David understood that she was thanking him. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched his face, and he felt a warmth spread through his entire body. Suddenly, the girl's head snapped up, and she looked toward the forest with alarm. David could hear the voices getting closer. They had maybe 30 seconds before the soldiers reached the clearing. To David's amazement, the girl stood up despite her weakness. She pressed her hands against the strange metal structure, and David felt the air around them change. There was a humming sound, and all the lights on the alien device started flashing rapidly. The truck engines suddenly went quiet. David could hear the soldiers cursing and yelling about their vehicles not working. Somehow the girl had shut down their trucks from a distance. She grabbed David's hand and pulled him toward the edge of the clearing. Even though she was weak, she was surprisingly strong. As they ran into the forest, David could hear the soldiers trying to restart their engines, but nothing was working. The girl led him through the dark woods with confidence, as if she could see perfectly in the night. David stumbled along behind her, his camera bag bouncing against his back, still hardly believing what had just happened. They ran for what felt like hours, until finally the girl stopped beside a small stream. She sat down heavily, clearly exhausted from using her abilities to disable the trucks. David sat beside her, both of them breathing hard. In the moonlight, David could see her more clearly now. She was definitely not human, but she was also the most beautiful person he had ever seen. Her skin still had that faint glow, and her white hair seemed to move in a breeze that David couldn't feel. She looked at him with those incredible silver eyes, and David felt something new in their mental connection. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper. By saving her, he had somehow created a bond between them that went beyond anything he had ever experienced. David realized that his quiet, simple life was definitely over. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. David led the alien girl through the dark forest toward his grandfather's old cabin. He'd inherited the place 3 years ago, and it was perfect for hiding miles away from the nearest road, surrounded by thick woods and completely off the grid. If they were going to be safe anywhere, it would be there. The girl walked beside him in silence, but David could feel her presence in his mind like a warm glow. It was the strangest thing he'd ever experienced. Sometimes he would think of something, like being thirsty, and she would nod as if she had heard his thoughts. Other times, he would suddenly know things about her without her saying a word. When they finally reached the cabin, David fumbled with his keys while the girl stood behind him, looking around nervously. The moment they got inside, she collapsed onto his couch, exhausted from their long journey through the forest. David turned on a few lights and got her a glass of water. She drank it gratefully, and he could see some color returning to her pale, glowing skin. That they were safe, he had a chance to really look at her. She was definitely not human, but she was also beautiful in a way that took his breath away. Her silver eyes met his, and suddenly David's mind was flooded with images. But these weren't painful flashes like before. They were clear, detailed pictures that told an amazing story. He saw her world, a place with 3 purple moons, and cities that floated in the clouds. The buildings were made of some kind of crystal that changed colors with the seasons. Her people looked similar to humans, but with that same glowing skin and silver eyes. They were peaceful, advanced, and had been watching Earth for many years. Through the mental connection, David learned that her name was something that sounded like music when she thought it. Since he couldn't pronounce it, he started thinking of her as Luna because of her silver eyes that reminded him of moonlight. Luna showed him more images, her ship flying through space, studying Earth's wildlife, and taking careful notes. Her people were scientists and explorers, not invaders. They had been secretly helping humanity for decades, preventing wars and natural disasters when they could do so without being noticed. But 3 months ago, something had gone wrong. Luna's ship had been detected by a secret government group that hunted aliens. They had shot her down with some kind of energy weapon, and she had barely survived the crash. The soldiers had found her unconscious and taken her to their hidden base. David felt sick as Luna shared memories of her captivity. The men in the lab coats had run endless tests on her, trying to understand her technology and abilities. Had treated her like a science experiment, not a living being with feelings and thoughts. But the most amazing part was what Luna told him next. In her culture, when someone risked their life to save another person, it created something called a soul bond. It was more than just friendship or gratitude. It was a spiritual connection that linked people together forever. David could feel this bond growing stronger between them. His senses were becoming sharper, and he was starting to understand things that should have been impossible. When Luna touched his hand, he could feel electricity flowing between them, and his mind felt clearer than it ever had before. Luna explained that humans with certain rare genetic traits could adapt to her people's way of life. The fact that David had been able to use his camera to break her energy chains proved that he had these special abilities. Most humans couldn't even see the chains, let alone interact with them. As they talked through their mental connection, David learned that Luna's people lived for hundreds of years. They had technology that could heal any injury, travel faster than light, and even enhance human abilities beyond imagination. But they only shared these gifts with people who proved themselves worthy through acts of courage and compassion. Luna rested. David kept watch at the windows. He knew the soldiers would be looking for them, and it was only a matter of time before they found the cabin. He had to make a decision about what to do next. Luna seemed to sense his worries because she sat up and looked at him with those incredible silver eyes. Through their bond, she showed him something that made his heart race. She could take him with her to her home world, where he would be welcomed as a hero for saving her life. But it wouldn't be a simple trip. If David chose to go with her, his human life would be over. He would be transformed, enhanced, and become something more than human. He would live for centuries, travel among the stars, and be part of a civilization that was thousands of years more advanced than Earth. The choice seemed impossible. David thought about his simple life, his job at the photo shop, his small apartment, his quiet weekends hiking in the mountains. It wasn't much, but it was familiar and safe. But when he looked at Luna, he felt something he'd never experienced before. It wasn't just attraction or curiosity. It was a deep connection that made him feel complete. Through their bond, he could sense that she felt the same way about him. Luna showed him images of her world again, but this time he was in the pictures. He saw himself standing beside her on a crystal balcony, watching purple moons rise over an alien landscape. He saw himself learning to use incredible technologies, exploring distant planets, and living adventures that no human had ever imagined. But then reality crashed back in. David heard the sound of engines in the distance, and Luna's expression changed to one of fear. The soldiers had found them. David looked out the window and saw lights moving through the forest. There were more vehicles this time, and they were surrounding the cabin. The same government group that had captured Luna was closing in, and they had brought reinforcements. Luna stood up, her silver eyes glowing brighter with determination. She placed her hand on David's shoulder, and he felt power flowing through. Their connection. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The engines were getting closer, and David knew they had only minutes before the soldiers reached the cabin. He had to make the most important decision of his life, and he had to make it now. Looking at Luna, David realized that some choices make themselves. His quiet, simple life had ended the moment he decided to help her. There was no going back to the way things were before. The only question now was whether he would run toward an incredible future or spend the rest of his life wondering what could have been. The sound of vehicles surrounding David's cabin was getting louder by the minute. Through the windows, he could see at least 6 sets of headlights moving through the trees, creating a circle around the building. The soldiers weren't taking any chances this time. David felt his heart pounding as he watched the lights get closer. Luna stood beside him, her silver eyes glowing brighter than usual. Through their mental connection, he could feel her fear, but also her determination. She wasn't going to let them capture her again. A loud voice echoed through the forest, amplified by a megaphone. "This is Colonel Blake of the Special Research Division. We have you surrounded. Come out with your hands up and nobody gets hurt." David looked at Luna, and she shook her head firmly. Through their bond, she showed him images of what would happen if they surrendered. The soldiers would separate them, lock David up for questioning, and take Luna back to their laboratory. This time, they wouldn't be so careless about letting her escape. The colonel's voice came again, closer now. "We know you're in there. You have 60 seconds to come out, or we're coming in." Luna moved away from the window and knelt down beside David's old backpack. She pulled out a small device that looked like a smooth silver stone. David had never seen it before, but somehow he knew what it was, a communication device that could reach her people among the stars. She pressed the stone, and it began to glow with soft blue light. Tuna closed her eyes and concentrated, sending a message across the vast distance of space. David could feel her thoughts reaching out, calling for help, but he also sensed something troubling. Her people were very far away, and it would take time for them to respond. 30 seconds, the colonel announced. David could hear soldiers moving around the cabin, getting into position. Luna opened her eyes and looked at David with an expression that broke his heart. Through their connection, she was telling him that she was sorry for bringing danger into his life. She was ready to sacrifice herself to keep him safe. But David had already made his decision. Over the past few days, Luna had become the most important person in his world. The bond between them was stronger than anything he'd ever felt, and he wasn't going to let her face this alone. "Oh," David said out loud, surprising himself with how firm his voice sounded. "We're in this together." Luna's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. She reached out and took his hand, and David felt power flowing between them. Their connection was getting stronger, and with it, his new abilities were growing too. Front door exploded inward as soldiers rushed into the cabin. David and Luna were ready for them. Luna raised her hand, and the soldiers' weapons jammed. Their communication radios started sparking and went dead. The lights in the cabin flickered and went out. In the darkness, David found that he could see perfectly. His enhanced vision showed him exactly where each soldier was standing. Luna was beside him, her skin glowing like a beacon, creating a shield of energy around them both. The soldiers were shouting in confusion, trying to use their broken equipment. Colonel Blake was yelling orders, but his men couldn't hear him over the static coming from their dead radios. Luna grabbed David's hand and led him toward the back of the cabin. They moved silently through the chaos, invisible to the confused. Soldiers, Luna's abilities were incredible, but David could feel that using so much power was draining her energy. They slipped out through the back door and into the dark forest. Behind them, the soldiers were still stumbling around in the cabin, trying to figure out what had happened. David and Luna had maybe a 5-minute head start before the soldiers realized they were gone. As they ran through the woods, David felt something amazing happening. His body was changing, becoming stronger and faster. His senses were sharper than ever before. He could hear the soldiers' heartbeats back at the cabin, smell the metal of their weapons, and feel the electromagnetic fields from their equipment. But Luna was getting weaker. The effort of disabling all those weapons and radios had cost her a lot of energy. She stumbled, and David caught her before she could fall. "I'm okay," she whispered, but David could feel through their bond that she wasn't. She was exhausted, and her power was almost gone. They found a hiding spot behind some large rocks, and Luna sat down heavily. David knelt beside her, worried about how pale she looked. Even her natural glow was fading. "Listen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My people received my message. They're coming, but it will take time. Maybe an hour, maybe more." David looked back toward the cabin, where he could see flashlights moving through the trees. The soldiers had figured out that they were gone, and were starting to search the forest. With dogs and thermal imaging equipment, it wouldn't take long to find them. "What do we do?" David asked. No. Luna looked at him with those beautiful silver eyes, and David felt something change in their connection. She was doing something to their bond, making it stronger and more permanent. Power flowed between them like electricity, and David felt his transformation accelerating. "I'm sharing more of my abilities with you," Luna explained. "It's dangerous for both of us, but it's our only chance." David felt incredible energy coursing through his body. His vision became even sharper, and he could suddenly sense things that were impossible for humans to perceive. Heat signatures of the soldiers, the electromagnetic fields of their equipment, even the radio waves they were using to communicate. "The process isn't complete," Luna continued. "If we're separated now, or if something happens to me, you could be hurt badly. But if we stay together, if we survive this, you'll become something amazing." David understood what she was saying. She was risking everything to give him the power to protect them both. If the soldiers captured her now, not only would she be taken back to the laboratory, but David might not survive the incomplete transformation. The sound of barking dogs echoed through the forest. The soldiers were getting closer, and their search was becoming more organized. David could hear Colonel Blake coordinating the hunt, determined not to let them escape again. Luna tried to stand up, but she was too weak. David realized that she had given him most of her remaining energy, leaving herself defenseless. The incredible gift she had given him came at a terrible cost. "I can carry you," David said, but Luna shook her head. "You need to run," she whispered. "Save yourself. When my people come, tell them what happened." But David wasn't about to abandon her. The bond between them was too strong, and he loved her too much to leave her behind. He'd come too far and risked too much to give up now. The dogs were getting closer, and David could hear the soldiers spreading out through the forest. They had thermal imaging equipment that would find Luna's glowing body heat within minutes. David looked up at the stars, hoping to see some sign of Luna's people coming to rescue them. The night sky was clear and beautiful, but it was also empty. They were still alone, facing impossible odds. But as the soldiers closed in around them, David felt something incredible happening. The power Luna had shared with him was growing stronger, and he was beginning to understand what he could do with it. Maybe they weren't as helpless as they seemed. Maybe together they could find a way to survive until help arrived. The real test was just beginning. David could feel the new power flowing through his body like lightning. Luna had given him abilities he never dreamed possible, but she was now so weak that she could barely keep her eyes open. The soldiers were closing in fast, and David knew he had to do something incredible to save them both. He closed his eyes and reached out with his enhanced senses. He could feel every soldier in the forest, their weapons, their radios, even their heartbeats. Through Luna's gift, David understood that he could influence electronic devices just like she could. But his human creativity gave him ideas that her people had never considered. Instead of just jamming the soldiers' equipment, David did something clever. He made all their radios work perfectly, but he changed what they were hearing. Each soldier started receiving different orders, sending them running in wrong directions. Within minutes, the organized search became complete chaos. Luna opened her silver eyes and looked at David with amazement. "How did you learn to do that so quickly?" she whispered. "I guess humans think differently than your people," David said with a smile. "Sometimes being unpredictable is an advantage," but their victory was short-lived. Colonel Blake was smarter than his soldiers, and he quickly figured out what was happening. David could hear him shouting orders, trying to regain control of his men. That's when David saw the most beautiful sight of his life. A soft golden light was growing in the sky above them, getting brighter and bigger. Luna's people had finally arrived. The ship that descended from the stars was nothing like the flying saucers from movies. It was elegant and organic looking, like a massive flower made of crystal and light. It moved without sound, settling gently in the clearing where David had first found Luna. The soldiers started shooting at the ship. Their bullets simply bounced off its surface like raindrops. The ship's response was swift and gentle. It sent out a wave of energy that made all the soldiers fall asleep instantly. They collapsed peacefully to the ground, completely unharmed but unconscious. David helped Luna to her feet, and together, they walked toward the ship. As they got closer, David could see figures moving inside the glowing crystal walls. Luna's people had come to bring her home. A section of the ship opened like a blooming flower, and 3 beings stepped out. They looked like Luna, but taller and more radiant, with skin that glowed like moonlight, and eyes that sparkled with ancient wisdom. The leader, who seemed to be Luna's father, approached them with an expression of joy and relief. He spoke in their musical language, and David was amazed to discover that he could understand every word. Luna's gift had given him the ability to communicate with her people. "My daughter," her father said, embracing Luna gently. "We thought we had lost you forever." Luna smiled weakly and gestured toward David. "This is the one who saved me. Broke the energy chains that held me prisoner, and he protected me from the soldiers. Without him, I would still be trapped." Her father looked at David with those same silver eyes, and David felt a warmth spreading through his chest. Through some kind of telepathic scan, Luna's father was learning everything about David's character, his motivations, and his growing bond with Luna. "You have shown remarkable courage," her father said to David. "Very few humans have the genetic markers necessary to interact with our technology. Fewer still have the heart to risk everything for a stranger." David felt embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what anyone would do," he said. Luna's father replied with a gentle smile. "You did what very few would do. You chose compassion over fear, love over safety. These are the qualities that mark a true hero." Luna's father explained that the bond between David and Luna was something special, even by their standards. Soul bonds were rare, and they always indicated that 2 people were meant to be together across all boundaries of species and worlds. "The question now," her father continued, "is what you want to do with the gift my daughter has given you." David looked at Luna, who was recovering her strength now that she was near her people's healing technology. She was still the most beautiful being he had ever seen, but now she was also something more. She was his partner, his other half, the person who made him complete. "I want to be with her," David said without hesitation. "Wherever she goes, whatever that means for me." Luna's father nodded approvingly. "The transformation she began can be completed, but only if you truly want it. You would become one of us, able to travel among the stars and live for centuries. But you would also leave your human life behind forever." David thought about everything he would be giving up, his job, his apartment, his quiet life in the mountains. But when he looked at Luna, he realized that none of those things mattered anymore. She had shown him wonders beyond imagination, and he couldn't go back to being ordinary after experiencing something so extraordinary. "I choose her," David said firmly. "I choose this life." Luna's eyes filled with tears of joy, and she took David's hand. The moment their fingers touched, David felt the transformation completing itself. Power flowed through him, changing him on a cellular level. It's making him stronger, faster, and more aware than any human had ever been. The process was painless, like being filled with warm sunlight. David felt his senses expanding, his mind opening. 2 new possibilities, his body adapting to technologies that had been impossible for him to use before. When it was over, David looked at his hands and saw that his skin now had a faint glow, just like Luna's. He was still human in his heart and mind, but he was also something more, a bridge between 2 worlds. Luna's father smiled at them both. "Welcome to the family," he said to David. "You are now one of us, and you will always have a home among the stars." Over the following months, David learned about Luna's world and her people's advanced civilization. They lived in harmony with nature, using technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. They had eliminated war, poverty, and disease thousands of years ago, focusing instead on exploration, knowledge, and the pursuit of beauty. But David's favorite discovery was that Luna's people had been secretly helping Earth for generations. They had prevented nuclear wars, guided scientific breakthroughs, and protected the planet from cosmic disasters. With David as their ambassador, they were ready to make contact with humanity officially. David and Luna returned to Earth together, but not as fugitives. They came as representatives of a new era of cooperation between humans and their cosmic neighbors. The same government that had once hunted them now welcomed them as heroes. Colonel Blake, who had been so determined to capture Luna, became one of their strongest supporters when he learned about the incredible benefits that cooperation with Luna's people could bring to humanity. David stood in the same forest where he had first found Luna, but now everything was different. Instead of hiding in the shadows, representatives from dozens of worlds were gathering for the first official meeting between Earth and the Galactic Council. Luna stood beside him, more beautiful than ever, her silver eyes sparkling with happiness. Through their bond, David could feel her joy at seeing her dream of peaceful contact finally coming true. "Do you ever regret your choice?" Luna asked him telepathically. David looked around at the incredible scene, humans and aliens working together, sharing knowledge and friendship, building a future that was brighter than anything either species could have achieved alone. "Never," David replied, taking her glowing hand in his. "This is the best reward anyone could ask for." As the first official meeting between Earth and the stars began, David realized that his simple act of kindness in freeing a trapped stranger had changed not just his own life, but the destiny of two entire civilizations. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of courage, and sometimes the most amazing rewards come to those who are willing to help others without expecting anything in return. David and Luna had found their perfect future together among the stars.